shall be. We're back again. Today's video is called Spirit War Boot Camp number 79, and this one's called Physics and the Spirit War. So how's everyone doing? So what is the Spirit War, first of all? Well, this is the understanding that there's a strategic battle that's being waged on the plane of the spirit. Most people know about physical combat, right? They watch MMA, or they watch boxing, or they watch other types of martial arts and fighting styles, right? So that's the combat on the core physical level, right? And what's at stake is the physical body. Like if you get into that kind of combat, you can injure your body, you can break bones, you can get cuts and bleed. You can strain your muscles, strains and sprains. There's all kinds of hazards on that level, right? And so in the realm of the sciences, right, we would call this the physics of the situation, right? And chemistry, right? These are the core physical science. They're called physical sciences, sometimes called material sciences, right? So this is at play in the spirit war. Like a lot of times the spirit war is waged in order to destroy the physical body, because you think of it like a building. A lot of times if they bomb or they want to demolish a building, they got to take out the foundation, because if the foundation remains sound, there's a limited amount of destruction that you can get done, right? And so, however, though, as I don't know who's been watching all these videos. I had a wizarding series of videos that was old, way before this. There was 160 of those videos, and now we're on Spirit War 79. I've had other different series as time goes on, but anyway, at the very beginning of all those videos, what I was talking about was two main things. I was talking about, number one, the idea of the energy body, right? Human bioelectricity, right? So this is kind of the crossing line between the physical substance and the spirit, right? Because as we know, our thoughts and our perceptions, our feelings and our emotions are all transmitted through the body, through the basis of the nervous system. And the energy that's transferred in such a way is electrostatic. There's also an optical component to it. And of course, there's also magnetism, because wherever you have electricity, you have magnetism. So this is the threshold between the material war and the spirit war. Now, what I was going to say is how causality flows this way. This is why I love the pre-Socratic philosophers and the Platonists and the Neoplatonists, because they understood this and they clearly explained it in a logical way, how the physical comes down into manifestation as a result of things that exist on the higher plane. A lot of Socratic translators will think and describe what he calls the world of form, right? Which is that's considered the core mathematical substrate. Beyond the physical substrate, there's a pattern substrate, which is mathematics. Like if you think about DNA, the shape and structure of DNA, the primary, secondary, tertiary structures of DNA are founded on the mathematics and geometry, right, of these nitrogenous bases, right? The base pairs that make up the DNA have a particular geometry. And so that geometry has layer upon layer determining these physical structures of the DNA. And of course, all our body, all the expression of our genes gives us our hair color, eye color, all the characteristics of our physical body is determined by a mathematical substrate, which in this case is geometry, right? So now if you can understand that kind of a concept, right? How all physical matter is dependent upon laws that occur on the mathematical level. Now we need to go up another level. So we're going material and energetic, right? They're both determined based on this mathematical level, right? So that's a higher substrate. This is getting closer to what we're calling the realm of pure information, right? So matter at the bottom, energy in the middle, information above. And then the higher level, we don't have no way to refer to it as except maybe paradox, right? Or non-existence, or the non-duality of existence and non-existence, right? It gets crazy when you go up there. But all of our stuff is reckoned in terms of dialectics and opposites, black and white, plus and minus, electrons and protons, and so on, right? Light and dark, yin and yang, right? But there's a higher non-dual level, right? And so one fundamental consequence of duality is causality, right? Because if you see cause and effect as separate, now you have to come up with a causal predictive science, right? the way that we have calendars, right? That's a causal predictive science that's based on a temporal duality between past and future. However, that duality is purely subjective, right? So anyway, these are all things that are very key to understand because, like I said, all strategy is based on causality and the temporal duality, right? So we could get into time inversion and how Maxwell's theories predict negative time or inverse time or orthogonal time, as Philip K. Dick was fond to refer to it as. But once you get into this orthogonal time, the causality, the context of it changes in a radical way because you can have retrocausality. And in many instances of modern physics, they're observing phenomena they're referring to as retrocausal. So in other words, the effect appears before the cause in terms of the perception of the experimenter, right? And I'm not going to go into that. That'll take us way too far afield. But let's just say it's all about levels, right? And what I'm arguing with the series of Spirit War is that everything material is downstream of the ideological, the psychological, right? Programming. This is where we get culture and programming. So this is a predictive programming is a really good phrase to think about in this context because basically, let's just say you have the media and they say monkey see, monkey do. So if you have the power to propagate information structures and cultural forms in a massive way on an industrial scale of mass production, like say you own Springer Verlag, right? Say you're Robert Maxwell and you own Pergamon Press and you own Springer Verlag and you print a large variety of textbooks. So millions and millions of people are going to read the books that you publish. And because that gives them an informational context, it gives them a value structure, it gives them cultural forms on which they're taught and programmed to make decisions based on this cultural paradigm. And of course, we all know there's cultural diversity, like different cultures place different levels of value on certain things. A lot of cultures in this world, I have observed, do not place any value on the intellect or on education whatsoever, not on the public sphere, right? So, but by contrast, various cultures do particularly place a strong emphasis and a strong value and a strong moral imperative, if you will, on the gaining of intelligence and the use of intelligence as a cultural form and as a form of service to the world, okay? But like I said, a lot of cultures do not particularly value that. What we're living in is we're kind of living in a split culture, which is where all the elites, right, the big data people, the information brokers, right, they place a supreme value on information, more so even than human life, more than money, right? Because they know that old saying, knowledge is power, is really profoundly true. And again, we're looking at a force multiplier, right? So as I'm saying, since these ideological and information constructs are upstream from the physical, right? Think of it this way. Think about the cultures where they do the skull binding to make elongated skulls, or they do foot binding, or they do these various different things, right? That alters the physical structure of humanity as a cultural value, right? Like in a lot of cultures, in some cultures, having super fair skin is considered prioritized, but in other cultures, it's the opposite, right? And so these are cultural norms. A lot of times this is based on the climate and the environment where the culture arises. But what I'm just trying to illustrate with these examples is how culture is upstream of the physicality, right? So the subtle point is, how do you get to influence people on this non-physical level? Because that's where the major power is being flexed, okay? This is where we get propaganda, psychological warfare, behavior modification, predictive programming, hypnosis, mesmerism, chemically induced hypnosis, right? Using ELFs, low frequency radio waves, microwaves to influence the human physiology, the human cognition, the human perception, right? So there's this connection between the material level, our physics, our chemistry, right? And then this informational level, right? The use of all these different cultural forms of propaganda and psychological warfare to manipulate and condition the behavior of everyone in such a way that not only influences their physical body, but it transforms reality all around them. Like if you want to go look at a highway, for instance, where did all that tar come from? Where did all the cement and where did all these substances come from? These compound, complex substances to build the modern world. These are excavated, right? These are put into big trucks and moved around in the tons, by the tons, right? Okay. So think about how that transforms the physical world beyond what you're just looking at surface level, eye level, like your street sign or your, traffic lights and whatnot, not like that. Like think about the macro scale of cause and effect, you know? So now something is hurting humanity. Okay, there's no getting around that. And whoever or whatever that is, the means that they do it are primarily cultural. And they're manipulating this plane of subtle energy and information that we call culture, that we call popular culture, movies, film, TV, comic books, video games, nursery rhymes. Every single one of these is an informational structure that's used in order for its downstream causal effect that's going to basically emerge. So in essence, you could think of these cultural forms as like a seed crystal or nucleus of the future of the human world, right? So now I was trying to talk about the physics of spirit war. Well, if you want to become, let's just say, a spiritual ninja, a spiritual special forces operative, right? I would say delta operative, but we're in a way different frequency band than that. We're not in the delta. We're up into the thetas and we're up into the low sub delta, right? This is where the reality structuring occurs and takes place. So there's a connection between this spirit war, being a competent and powerful spiritual warrior, requires us to master things all along the causal continuum. We have to master the health of our physical body. We have to understand biology, chemistry, subtle electricity within the body. We have to understand the mineral salts. We have to understand fats, proteins, carbohydrates, and simple sugars, for instance. We have to understand all the biological cell salts. This is a form of alchemy and chemistry, right? The biological cell salts that govern our physiology, not only of our physical performance, but also our mental and most importantly, perceptual performance. Once you understand these sciences, now you can learn to fine tune your brain waves and your brain states, your heart rate. All these aspects of athletic performance can be trained and purified and refined and strengthened through this knowledge of the substrate, right? So now we have a physical mastery. So we can control our heart rate, we can control our wake and sleep cycles, we can control the hormones that are secreted in the body based on melatonin and serotonin cycles and how our body reacts to light, right? And the stimulation of these substructures within the brain and the endocrine system, right? It's like a finely tuned machine, okay? Everyone's losing their shit over AI and all these supercomputers. That's a fucking tinker toy bullshit compared to the human physical brain. More importantly, if you could synchronize the brains of large numbers of highly competent people, now you're dealing with something way, way more powerful than any supercomputer that's ever been built. And it's about 1 million times more resource efficient to have the biological human specimens, right? So when you go and try to build data centers in Starbase, Texas and all like that, you're wasting trillions of fucking dollars, okay? All because you refuse to want to understand the subtlety of the spirit war and the multi-component basis of the human physical organism, okay? So first you master the physical body. Now you start to get into these subtle things like the hormones and all these different things. And then you get into your brain waves and your perceptual field, right? They say, and like I said, look at the continuum. Okay, the mind is way up at the top above the body, right? Because your ideas and attitudes control your physical health, okay? First of all. But more so than that, just the way that that's a physical reality, your thoughts, your ideology, your perception, your perceptual clarity, right? Your ability to go through cognitive and perceptual obscurations, right? Now you see clearly. And so every strategy that you undertake, every action that you instigate is going to be more powerful, more accurate, more resource efficient, right? But more importantly, you're going to be able to shape reality not only on the physical plane, but on the subtle plane. The same plane as these cultural forms that the evil are using to corrupt, dumb down, deaden, sexually neutralize, sterilize, corrupt humanity. You can do everything opposite of that, okay? You make yourself strong, self-sufficient, economically sufficient, ability to have pure, healthy food, pure air, clean air, and have your psyche functioning at a powerful level where you can cooperate with all humanity to subvert and overthrow the evil arcs through the victory in the spirit war.